very much for giving me this wonderful opportunity to introduce all of you about the former situation in 2011, the nuclear accident in Fukushima, not only Fukushima Prefecture, the northern and it's included metropolitan region in Japan. And also I will introduce you about the current situation 8 years on aftermath of the nuclear disaster. Yes, it's my introduction but skipped. So as you know very well about nuclear accident in Japan, the nuclear power plant is located in Fukushima Prefecture, ocean side, Pacific Ocean side, and then at the time I was in Fukushima City. It had about 60 kilometers to 70 kilometers from the nuclear reactor site, capital city in Fukushima Prefecture. At that time I was in about 1 month later. This is my experience. Under the emergency situation, many people were very panicked and they evacuated some area even in Fukushima City. Then 1 month later, I visited some supermarket and I observed some mothers standing. Mothers group are standing and talking each other. So I just look at the mothers group and they came into the supermarket. I bought something, then came out. Still about 30 minutes or 40 minutes they are discussing. So I just listened their talk, what they were talking. So they are mothers. What is our future? What is our happiness? What is our life or children's issues? We have to. Should we evacuate? Or some very serious face. Some mothers are more almost crying. So I realized that we are very catastrophic experience we just met. It's not a movie. It's an actual situation. The mothers also say that money or life. So who has responsibility under this situation, because the government never apologized, and typical nuclear companies didn't say that situation clearly. That time is a very confused time. So this is a picture. It's not so clear picture, but this is a small. This is a hall, meeting hall. Many people rush on to listen about the scientist lecture in Minamisoma City. It's close to Fukushima City. It's a nighttime, evening time, around 6 p.m. Many people rush on the hall and to listen some specific to get the information. So how to they wanted to decide to evacuation or not. Under the emergency time, so in Fukushima Prefecture, there are many authorities came in and give the people the information. The famous scientist, Dr. Shunichi Yamashita, he is a professor and vice president of Nagasaki University and the radiation risk and health advisor of Fukushima Prefecture. After March 11, he became the health advisor in Fukushima Prefecture. He said in front of the many people in Fukushima Prefecture, all of people are very scared under the fallout of situation of radiation, but in front of them, he made a speech. Crying people will receive radiation. Smiling people won't receive radiation. Let's smile. So it's a very crazy speech. And the mothers are also crying and upset. But he made us, oh, you are amateur. So kinds of the deficit model of STS. And he also made a speech. Fukushima, Fukushima, Fukushima. Fukushima will be well known around the world. You didn't anything, but Fukushima became famous than Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we are all more upset. But he made a speech 5 or 6 cities in Fukushima Prefecture. So we people were upset and felt that we are under the discrimination from the professionals and authorities and scientists. Later, many people were making a joke and sharing the scientists who ignored people impact for the nuclear disaster. Mr. Shunichi Yamashita. Yamashita is a family name. We call the Mr. Dr. Yamashita as a Damashita. Damashita means Japanese in Mr. Deception, Mr. Liar. It's a joking and brush off our dark feelings, very miserable feelings. And we have to try to standing up again. Yes, this is a Chinese character. Fukushima, as you know very well, Fukushima means a fortune island in Japanese. It's a very irony name after much even bad. I myself realize a very strong power from local people's activities and the resistance and making the situation betterment from the bottom. I like to introduce some one women voice. He is a survivor. She is a survivor. Sorry, under the invisibility. Her name is Mizue Kanno. She got the thyroid cancer after March 11. She said that it has already passed 8 years. She said that it's a sense of discomfort in the words, I won't forget Fukushima. I think that I will never forget means it's already over. Continuing to observe Fukushima and staying together with Fukushima is better for me. I like to tell as many people as possible that happened in Fukushima. The next would be you. It might be happen same things on to you. Many thyroid cancer patients talk to me anonymous. So invisible means like a victim's invisible situation for the victims and the patient is ignored. Nothing becomes everything is turned back to the normal. Invisibility of nuclear disaster situation, 1, and the victims, survivors, and the evacuees, and loss and damage. There are many important facts. There are delayed, erased, covered, and removed from the history. As a local journalist, from the view of the local, I have the local viewpoints. My mission is to make record and archiving the invisible nuclear disaster history in Fukushima after March 11. I'd like to introduce how the invisible situation was made in Fukushima and the nuclear disaster. As you know very well, nuclear and nuclear issues is very easy to invisible because radiation is invisible, no smell, no color. We couldn't touch by hands or something, so it's easy to changing the safe and risk to safe. Back to March 11, 2011, I would like to introduce the beginning time of my emergency situation in 2011. And this is a broken home, room, and tsunami destroyed the people's living, daily life. This is an evacuation center. This evacuation center is a huge city inside Fukushima Prefecture. This is an arena, like a gymnasium hall. 2,500 people are rushed on to evacuate. But later on, so many people rushing on, and very in the whole some crisis situation, because very elder people got sick, and some people got the flu, and many people also got sick, and then some families are separated and under the evacuation. For example, elder person is still remaining, and the young generation is evacuated outside the Fukushima Prefecture, so separated the family situation. This is a picture. Sorry, it's a little bit dark picture, but this is a very elder guy. His age is 98 years old. And this house is located in Iwaki City, the southern area of the nuclear reactor, about 30 kilometers area. This family is still remain and after nuclear exploded, because the elder guys got sick and couldn't move. So then all of the family is staying together with the elder guy. But during the emergency situation, supermarket has closed, water supply also sometimes stopped, electricity is stopped. Many people were very suffer under the situation. The masked guy is a doctor, is self-defense force, and then some caregivers and visiting, and they also provided the water, food. So at that time, I came into the house together with the doctors. So evacuation and the evacuation situation is very, very complicated. Some people could evacuate, but some people couldn't evacuation because some elder people had no car licenses, no cars, and then stay inside the house and just stay in. Then water supply and the food supply is a shortage. It's very they faced on another crisis. Edge and outside of exclusion zone. Japanese government decided the exclusion zone. The beginning time on the day March 11th and the 12th. Japanese government decided the evacuation, informed the evacuation order from the 3 kilometers. The next step is 10 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 10 kilometers. It's time by time. The exclusion zone is broader. Turning point, the moment people start considering not only external radiation exposure, but also internal exposure, human body inside, organs exposure, because people will take water, drink water. The water also contaminated by radiation. It's exposure inside of the body, double risks. This is the next month of the nuclear disaster, April 2011. Elementary school in Minamisoma City. Minamisoma City is about 50 kilometers to 60 kilometers from the nuclear reactor. This is a first grade elementary school students will going back to their home, finishing the classroom. Students put it on the masks. So in front of them, there are many cars stopping by driving by their parents to pick them up. So this is about 6 years old children put it on the masks, but the school restarted in April 2011. It's very criticized of the parents. They need more time to close the schools, but the local government decided to restart in the new elementary school. This is the same school in Minamisoma City. The first grade students waiting to pick up their parents to pick up. Yellow cap, yellow hat, put it on is a first grade student. But in front of the students, there is a decontamination work on the school ground. The huge machines moving across and cut off the soil of the school ground soil. It's contaminated by radiation. This is another school ground in Fukushima City. After local government clean up the effort, clean up means on the school ground is cut off the soil contaminated by radiation and mounted on the contaminated soil at the corner of the school ground. The blue seat, under the blue seat, there are many contaminated soil after cleanup operation, and in front of the school buildings. This is a preschool indoor garden in Fukushima City. It's also 50 to 60 kilometers from the nuclear reactor site. Some kindergarten or preschool is built a new indoor garden, put on the fresh soil imported from the Australia called white sand. This is people's effort to understand the explosion of radiation. Hibakusha record book movement to keep evidence, to remain the evidence. People will export it from the radiation, exposure of the radiation, to keep the evidence, to put it on the experience. During the time, during emergency time, what they eat, what they ate, what they drink, and by local people and NGOs working together. This is a sign on the supermarket in Fukushima City. Local supermarket show the radiation measurement detection number. Like a cucumber or some vegetables. The supermarket bought their own budget to detection measurement devices, and they show the consumer how much the radiation level involved to some vegetables. Minamisoma City, another city, it's a northern area reactor zone. Reactor area, the local government started internal exposure examination. The guys sitting on the chair. The chair is a detection of the radiation internal exposure. That called the whole body counter WBC. This is a map in May 2011. The 2 months later, Tomioka Town. Tomioka Town is a nuclear power plant located town. The people is worked at the local elder care center, but on the emergency time they were evacuated as soon as possible. But later on they came back to their own workspace to cover put on the security suits. Put on the masks and the glasses and some handmade security suits. This is in Fukushima City, 2011 May. Start measurement by people power for food, water, and vegetables. At the time, so local government didn't do the detection of the measurement, food, water, vegetable, but local people got the information how to measurement, and they invited international NGOs. This NGO came from France, and this is an open session and introduction how to measure the food detection of radiation. So I'd like to introduce the current situation inside the exclusion zone. So now this is the exclusion zone. It's a red colored in Fukushima Prefecture. Now it's divided to three categories exclusion zone. One is a difficult to return area. The second is the restricted residence area. The third is a preparation for the lifting on the evacuation order. The last year, Kawamata Town, sorry, this is a long name, not Kawamata Town. This is a, just a moment, Kawamata Town かな。Sorry, this is a Namie Town, exclusion zone, difficult to returning zone. It's a border gate. The Futaba North Elementary School classroom. It's like a kind of the stop the time since 2011. At the time, students are on the day March 11th. They will stay here, but they stayed here. But the town and the government made evacuation mandatory order. They left all of the school bag and some textbooks and evacuated. So the time stopped. The clock has stopped. 2011. This is a classroom in the blackboard in front of the desk. In the emergency time, many people write the comments. So it's okay, calm down, no tsunami coming. So it's encouraged each other among the students. This in Fukushima, not only Fukushima, at the nuclear disaster area, and the victims will make survivors invisible situation. It's a kind of the dark method, the bad method, reconstruction policy of the government, building new highlights events and the situation, ignoring victims and the damages, like a brush off the image of the victims and the nuclear disaster. As a local people, I am, so normalization, I felt the normalization. Like everywhere, there are many clean up garbage mountains, like black box. It's the beginning time. I was very scared. Oh, what's a black box? It's very scared. But every day, every time I watch on that such a black box, oh, I don't worry about like normalization will be happened. And the national government built the drone test site in the very coastal area of nuclear reactor site. So the national government, the prefecture government said that it's a new business instead of the nuclear power plant or nuclear industry. It's a very highlighting very wonderful business and safe to save the areas, disaster areas economics, but it's connected by militarism. As you know, 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games will be held in mainly Tokyo metropolitan area, but this Olympic Games is named as a Reconstruction Olympic by Prime Minister Abe. In Fukushima Prefecture, there will be some events. It's a torch running starting points in Fukushima Prefecture, in Tomioka, Hirono and Naraha area. It's very close to the nuclear power plant sites. And this torch running course is along with very close to the nuclear power plant site. And in Fukushima City, capital city, there will be held the baseball and softball games. Next, the BAT method. Divide and conquer by changing radiation level. Skip to another. Effective dose 20 ml criteria issues. In April 2011, the Japanese government raised the radiation exposure allowance limit from 1 millisievert to 20 millisievert per year. Effective dose allowance for publics. New regulation was settled under 20 millisievert. The 3 exclusion zone could be lifted by national government, but some local governments and the people criticized. It was quite high, 20 millisievert. New crisis return strategy. It's a return strategy. Is evacuation people should be returned to their original site. According to the radiation level, changing the way to clean up efforts. It will be skipped, sorry. And the health impact, over 200 children. It's a more specific number, 212 children diagnosed thyroid cancer and suspected thyroid cancer by Fukushima Prefecture Health Survey. But the health survey is mainly focused on the children's thyroid cancer. Ignore the adult thyroid cancer before I introduce the comments from the adult lady. But there were adult sickness is ignored. And also ignore the another sickness about another sickness. No adult cancer survey, no another cancer survey related to nuclear power plant accident. Ignore and the absence of full survey. Then prefecture government full health survey indicates that the official perspective. It's hard to think nuclear power plant accident is a cause of the disease. It's they said many times the formative comments by local government and the national government. It's there are no relation about the nuclear power plant accident. Then they will say the need for psychological care, and sometimes some governments, some local government, that the city government said we need psychological decontamination to the local people. Another method, after March 11, new concept word and disaster concept by Japanese and local government. Fuhyō higai. Fuhyō higai means harmful rumor and rumor damage. Some people criticize the nuclear disaster situation. Governments and the media said, you caused Fuhyō higai. You should promote to sell Fukushima products. But many victims and evacuees have doubt who caused a nuclear disaster. The typical nuclear power plant company and the national government has a responsibility. But the national government said some people, some ordinary people, some local people were caused by the Fuhyō higai. It's a very complicated situation. It's a world pressured to protest to nuclear disaster, and and also additional explanation, ambiguous definition of Fuhyō higai. What is a Fuhyō higai? Fuhyō higai, rumor damage, rumor disaster. The damage caused by consumers or customers who are concerned about the risk of contamination with radioactive material related to goods or services due to the fact that they were widely informed by news reports, blah, 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 that they were refrained from buying or selling the goods or services. No mention, but the national government, no mention of the responsibility themselves. Another crisis, change regulation without deliberative discussion. One of the very typical crises, recycling, reusing of the contamination soil and water. After March 11, Japanese government made a new regulation for reuse the radiation contamination soil came from cleanup operations. This is pictures only using the Japanese language, but new regulation is a contamination soil well, which radiation level under 8,000 becquerel per kilogram could be reused for public construction, like a highway building, roads, and some public buildings. Japanese government allowed to reuse the radiation contaminated soil. So I would like to introduce another issues of radiation contamination, like food, water, soil, vegetable, like animals and human beings also contaminated by radiation. South Korea banned imports of seafood from 8 provinces, prefectures in Japan, of course included in Japan. And after that, the Japanese government has sued Korea to WTO highest committee that Korea's import ban is unfair. But in April 2012, this year, WTO ruling, and South Korea won and the Japanese lost. But Japan lost. In Japan media reported that these reactions of foreign countries are rumor disaster as a Fuhyō higai. And I would like to introduce the reaction about the Japanese food, some contaminated foods, something that stop importing from some prefecture in Japan. It's Hong Kong, Macau, mainland China, Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, United States, and the Philippines is stop importing. No stop importing, but inspection certificate required. Indonesia, Brunei, French Polynesia, UAE, Egypt, Lebanon, or some countries, some regions. Strengthening of border inspection is Israel. Its data came from the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, Japan, in April 2011 this year. So the more another bad method. In 2015, I had an interview with Tony DeBrum. He's a minister. At the time, he was a minister of Foreign Affairs, Marshall Islands. Marshall Islands also affected by the fallout, atomic bomb testing. I had an interview and asked him, please give me and give us the good advice about after nuclear disaster in Fukushima. He said that a nuclear issue and the radiation issue, government and responsibility people will lie, deny, and classified. So his advice is very clearly in Fukushima also was met the situation, lie, deny, classify situation. And let's skip slowly. Resistance. I like to the more almost the final section. Under the very catastrophic situation, people is not just staying there. We have the power to standing out, to speak out, to make a more strong action. It's a very wonderful and powerful, energetic situation. Resistance for nuclear industry and stop the further loss. The government has made damage and victims invisible situation, but making the damage more serious. But it's now in the criminal court goes on. The committee for inquest or prosecuted 3 TEPCO executives. It's now going on. Tomioka had the sentences in September this year. This case, women activists worked very strong to prosecute the 3 people, 3 executives of TEPCO as a criminal court. And the civil court, over 20 civil courts is now going on, and people are fighting and they sued and try to make clearly the responsibility of the TEPCO and the national government. That's missing the tsunami. But now in Fukushima, still many people are killing or dying. Very important lives, precious lives are still losing by disaster-related death. In national government settled the two categories of the deaths after nuclear power plant accident. Direct death and the missing is a number of people killed or missing due to the earthquakes, tsunami. In Fukushima is 1,614 people were killed by earthquakes and tsunami disaster. But now the number is still mounting on by the disaster-related deaths. What is a disaster-related death? This is affected by the sickness, accidents, and suicides during the evacuation lifetime, and some changing the life situation is about in 2017, 2,200 about people were killed. The number is still going on. Because officially, at the beginning time, the 200,000 people are evacuated. And now the government said that about 40,000 or 45,000 people are still evacuation. But actually, more people are evacuation. And because some people are sometimes going back to their original house, but they have two residential area going back, moving like a duplication life. They will have some people is in a case, and they were separated the families. Mother and the children is a southern area in Japan, and the father is stay in the Fukushima Prefecture and working to get money to send their mother, their wife and the children. It's like a separated family is existing. So they are more suffering from the evacuation life, but they are countless from the national government survey. So this is Dr. Jinzaburo Takagi. It's a very Japanese citizen scientist. He passed away before March 11, but he said that science is not only the special, not only the academic person. From the bottom of the victims, for ordinary people will have the knowledge or experience to recover or changing the situation betterment. So the last final presentation, I would like to introduce many wonderful citizen scientists to mitigate this situation in Fukushima, not only Fukushima, but many around the world. Citizen research lab will open the Tarachine in Iwaki City. This is Tarachine means in old Japanese language, mothers. This is a kind of the mothers research laboratory for health, for children, for everyone. So this is mothers gather collecting money from the donors around the world and build the research laboratory and the clinics. And this is a picture of the they started thyroid cancer themselves with the detected the person is a doctor. And another citizens scientist activism is measuring soil contamination by local NGO, by citizen groups. The right side of the picture is a detection of the soil. Because the Japanese government is measure the soil contamination from the airplane, and as a local people, as ordinary people, and wanted to know the contamination of the soil in my house garden, in our children's school grounds. But national government, local government didn't detect some specific and small area, so that we have the need to detect by ourselves. We wanted to know these points. So then NGO citizen groups started the point. We want to know where, how much contaminated by soil, and make a map. And another women's groups fighting is about monitoring post of radiation. National government wanted to stop measurement by monitoring posts because it costs much money. But local people, especially mothers, were scared about the living side of the families. Then many mothers protest and demand to keep monitoring. So they made an action and push into the local government, local municipality, council members to continue to the monitoring. And finally, national government decided to continue to monitoring. But it's we still face on the crisis because our government decided to continue monitoring, but they said just for the time being. And continuing making the news fear to make the situation betterment due to nuclear accidents with the breach of the citizens and scientists. So, sorry, so very quick talk, but my presentation is just give you some discussion points from the Fukushima situation. More wonderful people will make a deep talk and more viewpoints and discussion points more wider. And thank you very much for your attention.
In response to the organizers' requests, I had done a much more academic analysis and in fact had asked for help from a Japanese nuclear scientist that I have worked with for many years. He was in fact once with the Japanese nuclear industry, and as a result of Fukushima and the cover-up in Fukushima, or the cover-up in Japan, the government cover-up, that he resigned, and he is now at the Nagasaki University Center, RECNA, which is that researches nuclear abolition. But he's also a colleague of mine with the International Panel on Fissile Materials. And so I had asked for his help because I saw, we were both at a meeting at Princeton in the States just a couple of months ago, and he had provided a PowerPoint on Fukushima and the aftermath. So I am going to still make available this PowerPoint to you, to the organizers, so they can actually look, so that you can see perhaps from a more technical angle, from someone who was embedded in the Japanese nuclear industry at the time of the Fukushima disaster, based in Tokyo, but who is now presenting on things like this. We heard the very personal testimony from Hiroko-san about the actual lives of the people being evacuated. And I think that conveys it most strongly. But I want you also to be able at least to see slides like this from Dr. Suzuki showing, the evacuation zones over time, and also data like this. We saw the black bin bags. We saw in Hiroko-san's photos these huge, absolutely full black bin bags full of radioactively contaminated vegetation. Actually, I saw these for myself in 2012 when I visited as part of a delegation of international physicians for the prevention of nuclear war. We had held a conference, I think it was August, September, maybe September, October. I forget the exact date, but we had held a conference in Hiroshima, but a group of us, doctors and participants, wanted to go to Fukushima, and this was facilitated for us by the Japan Association, the Japan affiliate of this doctors' organization for preventing nuclear war, who also enabled us to talk with other doctors in the zone who were treating people. One of the things that struck me then actually was, because this was only a year and a half after the tsunami and the disaster, what the doctors were saying at that time is that as they were monitoring the health, at that time there were very few radiation-related illnesses. The illnesses they were mostly treating were depression, including people who couldn't cope with the loss of their families, actually, not to death but to evacuation. And this was very different. I didn't expect this, but the doctor spoke very movingly of having to provide services to convince people not to kill themselves. Just think for a moment about that. It was very shocking. And this was one of Dr. Suzuki's slides. Now I'm just going to leave that up there. And when I met Hiroko-san yesterday, I mentioned that I had visited, and I couldn't remember the name of the village. And I knew that I'd written about it for Open Democracy, the online platform. And I then therefore Googled the piece that I actually realized I wrote 3 or 4 articles about Fukushima, because I also wrote as an analyst immediately after, as the accident was unfolding, when I was called mainly by CNN 2-3 times a day as the disaster unfolded, because I was receiving updates from Dr. Suzuki as part of IPFM. Of course, I couldn't mention his name then, but when I was going on CNN, I was analyzing as the accident unfolded and saying, look, I have real concern. I showed, I took CNN a model of the Fukushima reactor, showed how the spent fuel was stored above the reactor vessel and why this was dangerous. And I said, I am concerned that the next thing we are going to hear is that it's not just about the loss of coolant now on the reactor vessel, but that's going to create explosions. We're going to see explosions. We're going to see a boiling away of the water that is keeping the spent fuel, the so-called irradiated fuel, some call it. They call it used fuel. And a lot of people think, well, that means it's done its job of generating electricity and it doesn't have, the fissile dangers in it. That's, as I talked about yesterday, that's simply not true. It's still generating heat. The spent fuel rods have to be kept underwater, and if the water boils away, if there's an explosion and the encasing is like a large pond or swimming pool, but in Japan it was common to actually design the plants with the spent fuel kept above the reactor vessel. And sure enough, the next thing we were hearing, and CNN would phone me, and bleary-eyed, I'd get into a taxi and get back down to the CNN thing, and because in fact what I had just predicted a few hours earlier had happened. There was the explosions, and then there was the cracking of the ponds, and then the exposure to the air of the irradiated fuel rods, and the additional levels of contamination that further explosions continued to spread into the atmosphere, and also, of course, into the sea. Let's not forget. So I looked back at the article that I'd written. Actually, it turns out, as I look at it, within a week of coming back from visiting Fukushima. And the article, and you can find it on Open Democracy, it was actually, I titled it, From Fukushima to Hinkley Point. Now, Hinkley Point is already a nuclear power plant site, but they are a collaboration of French, Chinese, and British. Are building a Hinkley C reactor, and so it's a third thing. And I started the article by mentioning I had gone to a Green Party conference actually in Bristol, which is a city that I did my first degree at university. And there were a number of protesters there, a number of women who were protesting and having a kind of peace camp outside Hinkley Point to try to stop this being built. And they were handing out leaflets that showed, that superimposed evacuation zones of that time at Fukushima, and they superimposed it to show what such similar evacuation zones would look like emanating from Hinkley Point, going right into Wales, of course completely covering Bristol, which is really a rather large city by comparison, with Cardiff, the capital of Wales, only 20 miles across the Bristol Channel, because Hinkley is, like most power plants in countries that have a seacoast, the common place they build the power plants is going to be along the coast. And the reason for this is that power plants need a lot of water for the cooling. That's how they work. And so they tend to be built by, either major rivers or major seas, and that has, it's convenient for them. Of course it is. It makes it cheaper. The water supply is there. They just, have the input and then they, cycle it. But of course that carries a whole lot of dangers in terms of contamination of the sea as well as contamination of land or contamination of the rivers. And so I looked at this, and it enabled me then to actually explain to the British readership about my visit to Fukushima, because I was writing about it many months later and people forget. Not that so many people would be thinking about Fukushima in the UK 18 months beyond. For you, for people in Fukushima, it cannot be forgotten, because it is a daily struggle that people have to confront in their lives. It has changed everything. But a long way away, people, okay, there was that horrible accident and now we get on with our lives, and they forget and they don't apply it to themselves. So as I looked at this, I found myself, and I'm just going to kind of read a few little segments of this, because I think I wrote this when it was immediate in my memory. The fields, homes and roadside verges as the bus left Fukushima City were immaculately tidy, as expected in Japan. Remember, I lived in Japan for 2 years, so I, had this. This was the familiar rural landscape. Pretty houses interspersed with fluorescent green rice paddies, or dark green soybean fields, with long greenhouse frames or polytunnels, full of tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and other summer vegetables. A few miles out of Fukushima City, the scene suddenly changed. Gone were the tidy squares of rice and other crops. Instead, a riot of wild vegetation climbed up buildings and telegraph poles, obscuring the welcoming signs with their waving cartoon characters that used to greet us going into the towns and villages. The roads were practically empty of cars. Our bus passed heavy diggers and a few police vehicles. We saw boarded up schools, empty shops, houses that still had gardens where bright flowers fought for space with the creeping weeds. And in fields and lining the roadsides, we saw rows and rows of bulging sacks, black sacks, which local doctors told us were filled with contaminated topsoil and vegetation, awaiting collection as radioactive waste. Decontamination is a never-ending job here, as rains wash more radiation down from the hills and forests into decontaminated fields and gardens. So they would decontaminate the fields and gardens, except it never was fully. But you know, this has steep hills, so the rain just washes more down. Pink tape marked the boundary of a contaminated area behind a health clinic we visited. But the doctors admitted this was relative. I mean, it was just a couple meters away and down a steep slope. In front of the clinic, an electronic counter displayed current levels of radioactivity. And then I talk about something that particularly moved me, which was on the way to Kawaguchi village, was the village, Kawauchi village, which we were told was about 12 to 15 miles, so less than, well, around 20 kilometers from southwest of the crippled Fukushima power station. So it was within the, you know, it was the angle where on that day, that terrible day, the wind would have carried. And that was Kawauchi village. But on the way to Kawauchi village, I've spoken about this many times because it really struck me. We stopped at a beautiful farmhouse near a little duck pond next to rice and soybean fields. Things looked almost normal here. There was an elderly couple, and as the male farmer basically spoke through an interpreter to a whole group of the doctors, the international doctors, I wandered a little way away because I saw there was a woman, elderly woman, standing kind of on her own, just a little way away by the duck pond. And because I can speak a little Japanese, I went to her and I asked her about the ducks, and I said I was surprised actually to see ducks swimming around in their duck pond. Her name was Sonoko Akimoto. She was 67 years old. She told me that the ducks were being used as a means to monitor the levels of contamination. She and her husband, she told me, had actually retired. They'd handed the farm over to, I think it was their son and his wife and children, but it might have been their daughter and her husband and children. But she you know, it was the next generation, and in fact the grandchildren were growing up on the farm to be farmers as they were, and they all lived together, you know, in the farmhouse. It was, you know, this was, you know, they'd handed over, you know, she and her husband, they still enjoyed doing a bit of the farming, but they pretty much handed over, they enjoyed the grandchildren, all of this. But after the Fukushima disaster, their children and grandchildren evacuated. They had to be, because of course radiation especially affects the most vulnerable. The younger the children, the more likely they are to be harmed by whatever dose of radiation they get. Women of childbearing age, if they are contaminated, then that can affect any children they have in the future. This also affects men, of course it does, but all the studies show, and on the reading list I've given you some reading suggestions from Mary Olson and the Nuclear Information Research Service in the US, which has done a lot of studies into the gender aspect of radiation and other things. But so we know this. And so they had to evacuate, and they were living far south with other. I think they were living with people that they'd know. I think they were possibly family from further afield. But the point in this is she started crying at that point, and she'd been holding it in, and I just ended up putting my arms around her. You know, and in Japan you don't normally sort of do the touching, but it was the right thing to do. And she just said she was so lonely. She and her husband had decided they must stay. It was their livelihood. They hoped that eventually it would be decontaminated enough that her family could come back and they could farm, but she didn't know how long that would be. And she said, meanwhile, the government had said that they were more that it was necessary for them, you know, that they were more likely to be able to come back if they stayed now, this elderly couple, because they had a job to do. And their job was to carry on growing their crops in the knowledge that like last year's, these crops would then be dug up, bagged in those black bin bags, and treated as radioactive waste. Maybe next year's crops could be eaten, she said. Hopefully. But the clicking Geiger counter, I thought, and I wrote, warned of a bleaker future. So this is just one story, but it moved me because it's the human story that we were hearing from Hiroko-san, of the slides and the data that Dr. Suzuki sent me. And so the final thing that I'm going to say is someone yesterday, because I spoke only very briefly about nuclear energy in my kind of Nuclear Issues 101 that I did yesterday morning. So I did that rather quickly, and I do have more on this slide, on this PowerPoint, but I'm not going to show it. You can look at it. It'll be made available. But one of the people came up to me. One of you, I can't unfortunately remember who, but came up to me and said about China's China's nuclear power plant construction, and that it was being done on the coasts. And I think he was saying that that meant that if there was an accident, it wouldn't, you know, cause the whole surrounding area to be contaminated. And I pointed out the Fukushima, like most power plants, is on the coast because they need the constant supply of water, and it is a different pattern of irradiation and contamination because it goes into the sea, so it then becomes global. And we were talking about this, and I think we have to recognize that however much planning you do, anyone who there is a mathematical formula used for risk, and it is the probability of an event happening multiplied by the consequences of that happening. That's the mathematical formula of risk. So nuclear accidents and nuclear use is recognized at the moment to be very rare. And we spoke yesterday that the huge tsunami that overwhelmed Fukushima was above the parameters of the design planning for Japanese power plants because it's very, very rare. So but the problem is, as we've seen, consequences are so devastating and so high that when you multiply if the probability is anything greater than 0, and I think we can all admit that the probability of an accident is always greater than 0, where you're dealing with nuclear technologies, the consequences are so devastating that the risk has got to be calculated as very, very high, whether you're talking about weapons or you're talking about nuclear power plants. That's what we have to factor in. And saying that it's good for the economy or that it's necessary for energy, quite a lot of the slides that I got that I would have otherwise, but I don't think it's necessary to really put in now, which looks at accidents here, but also actually looks, I have this information from the World Nuclear Information Status Report, sorry, the World Nuclear Industry Status Report from Michael Schneider. It shows that nuclear is now declining in most countries. I think China is one of the few, and he's put some detail in about China that I'd asked him to do. Relative, you know, the renewable, sustainable, wind-based, wave-based, solar energy is overtaking nuclear already. Now that we've been putting investment into sustainable, renewable energy, which a lot of our governments refused to do for so many years, now that they are doing that, they're certainly doing it in Japan, they're increasingly doing it in many other countries. The cost of all renewable, sustainable energy generation is really coming down. The cost of nuclear in money terms, but also in human terms, most of all, is going up and up and up. And that is what we need to think about when we look at all of these issues and how they interconnect. And that's where I'll stop. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the work that Hiroko-san and Emiko-san, that you and your, you know, friends and colleagues and people in Fukushima are doing, and anything that we can do to help and to publicize, let us know. Maybe it's time I wrote another article, but, you know, we can talk about information that you can give me to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hiroko-san and Rebecca-san. I'd like to give some comments about what Hiroko-san mentioned and Rebecca-san said. I think that invisibility is an important keyword to understand the peculiarity of this Fukushima nuclear disaster, because the radiation is invisible, and unclearness of health effect of long-term exposure to low-level radiation. So the policymakers can use this invisibility and unclearness for their convenience. So if the radiation is visible and if you can smell it, everyone knows that this is contaminated and this is dangerous. But as it's not seen, so always the policymakers undermine the impact of contamination or radiation effect and always appear that now it is okay, or the situation is already settled and we can enjoy Olympics in Tokyo, like that. So to know the reality, the citizens' role and media's role is very important. And as AIHARA-san introduced, after the Fukushima disaster, so many citizens studied about the radiations and used the device of measurement and start measuring the radiation level of airborne radiation level and the radiation level in the food. And now people in Fukushima learned a lot of things. So please remember, I hope no more such accident happens in anywhere in the world. But once it happens, then every government will try to hide the information, the real information, and undermine the impact of the influence. So at that time, we citizens have to start measuring radiation, and we have to communicate each other. And at that time, maybe people of Fukushima will help the people in the affected area. And another thing I want to talk is that as Miss Johnson, Rebecca-san, we Japanese add san to the name. Rebecca-san mentioned about the depression of the people. And as I am now involved in a support program for the evacuees from Fukushima to other areas, the depression and the psychological trauma of the people still continues in very serious way, and sometimes the psychological damage is increasing. And what is the most hard things for them is the gap or difference of ideas between family members, among families, or between the significant others. Sometimes because the feeling or the idea of the level of risk of radiation is different from person to person. So it happens in a family that, like a husband says, "No, it's okay. You don't have to worry about it. It's already 8 years, and the radiation effect is negligible." But the wife says, "No. Because the children is more vulnerable to radiation. So to protect our children, we have to continue evacuation, and Fukushima is still very dangerous." So this gap between husband and wife and family members causes a serious psychological trauma, because the family member, you want most understanding, and the relationship is very essential for you. But once the gap is created among family, it is really tough for you. So I met many evacuees, especially mothers, in different area from Japan. In Japan, I mean that fathers still live in Fukushima and continue working, and mother and child evacuated. There are many such cases, and in many cases, of course, there are cases that the communication of the family and the idea of the family is almost same, and the relationship continues good. But in many families, in 8 years, divorces and the damage of relationship happens. Yeah. Yes, and it is very sad thing to see.
Thank you. And Professor Masaki will respond.
Yeah, thank you giving the chance to speak. I'd like to emphasize, what you should be aware, why we have nuclear accident. Because there is a, a certain mythology. You know, we strongly believe that nuclear accident never happened. Okay, that was a strong belief of my government and my people, our people. So that is why, you know, we have accepted, you know, peace use of the atom. And we constructed a good number of the nuclear power stations. It is going on in China and India, even Bangladesh, they are making it. And believing that no accident will take place. Okay? That is why they are accepting it. Otherwise, government cannot continue to construct. But that is why there is no preparation to the disaster, accident. So we may not elaborate the details, what happened immediately after accident, but not only government, or central government or local government, not only resident villagers, but also TEPCO. TEPCO is a company which is generating nuclear energy for Tokyo people in Fukushima. They are not prepared at all. They don't know what will happen, what would happen. Because they also, most of them in the company believe that there's no accident, no possibility. So it was very difficult, you know, for the resident people, whether we should evacuate or not. Government cannot give clear indication that we should evacuate immediately or not. You know, this is really difficult. That is why TEPCO, this Tokyo company of electricity, has prepared, you know, they put the generator as a supplemental electricity to keep cooling system, but they put it on the ground. And tsunami was much higher than the expectation, that's more than 10 meters. Expectation was 7 meters. That is why water came into the Fukushima nuclear power station and all electricity supply stopped, and then accident and disaster took the place. Then we don't know what to do. But the next point is that the second myth is, you know, low-level radiation. It has no problem. You know, that is another strong, you know, agitation or myth by government people or some certain scientists. So local government, central government say that yes, after some years we can return to our ancestors' land. Yes, everybody wants to return to the ancestors' land, but whether this is safe or not, it's very difficult to decide. Even today, we always, you know, discuss those points. But local people have a tendency to avoid discussing because they don't want to remember those stories. But you see, now Hong Kong people or mainland China people, I mean the government, profit ban importance of the Fukushima product. Because you people are afraid of long-term, low-level internal radiation. But we are eating, okay? Last 7 years, 8 years, we're eating, which you are not eating. So government said, you know, before the March 11, upper level is 1 millisievert per year. After March 11, my government started increasing 20 millisievert. We don't believe it, but still, we have to accept certain things, like 5 millisievert per year. We may have to accept it. But anyhow, it's up to you individually. As Emiko said, that it depends on the person, depends on the family. Okay? But your government are really afraid of the effect. After 20 years, 30 years, what will happen? Cancer rate might increase due to the low-level, long-term radiation, which was never proved scientifically yet, but it may come in the future. So you must be careful. You have to decide yourself, but you have to have a certain level of scientific knowledge to decide, which we have already studied, and we have decided to continue to eat Fukushima product. But anyhow, this is myths which government or company have a tendency to propagate that safety, and even after accident, low level is safety. Okay, these are 2 points which you have to be really careful. But I just also want to mention one more point. Why Japan has developed so many nuclear industries? After World War, or during World War II, we have a severe experience of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So we have a strong apathy or against feeling to the nuclear weapons. And also, the United States also, occupied Japan after World War II, and they prohibit Japan people to continue to study on nuclear physics. But during World War II, actually Japan has already developed nuclear physics. That is why, as early as 1948, Dr. Yukawa got the Nobel Prize. Because Japan also wanted to develop nuclear weapons. But it was prohibited. But after from 1950, this Korean War started. And United States, and then before that we have established this famous, wonderful, beautiful Article 9, Peace Constitution, including Article 9, assuming that UN multilateral security system will be established. But then Korean War started. Then America had to fight against socialist forces, and America finally permitted Japan to rearm, rearmization. And on that time, almost simultaneously, nuclear industry also started. So because you know that if we have a nuclear power stations, we get uranium to produce nuclear weapons. If we have a nuclear capacity to create nuclear weapon, it will be a good deterrent to the enemy. Might be, it could be Soviet Russia at that time, it could be China, present Japan. So those things is a background story. You have to be careful. Every citizen wants to live safe, and we want to live together. So this is a global community, but government and company might have different ideas. So we should be more united, and you should have also people's science to find out the fact. Otherwise, government or company has a tendency to hide truths and tell our lies. That is a myth. We have to be careful with the myth, and we have to break those myths together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was very stimulated Rebecca's talk, so totally I forgot. But your story was reflected my very important experience. The emergency time in 2011, I've just watched on the TV, on TV news. The news showed that very old women, around 92 years old, lady is under the evacuation time, she was committed suicide. She passed away. So she remained the last letter. So I will evacuate to the gravestone site. So I just was very shocked, because a 92 years old lady is the remaining lifetime is very short, just generally. She will spend a wonderful time, the last 3 years or 5 years or 8 years, something like that, so she could survive and live and very happiness time with grandchildren, many family members. So then I was very shocked. But at the time I was shocked, but I spent several days. And suddenly my cousin, she called to me. Did you watch on the news, on the TV? At 92 years old, women committed suicide. So then I answered, yes, I watch on the TV. So she said that, do you know, she is our relatives? And I was very shocked, also shocked. But I never met her, but quite far relatives. I didn't know her name, but she was our relative. So then at that time, I'm a journalist. I'm just observing the third person at this whole of the situation, like TV news, like movies. But I am also one of the victims our relatives also victims. So at the times, I have to cover this situation more seriously. So then this is why I will talk this my story. Rebecca show me now. My story is very powerful, even if it's a miserable situation, very, very tough situation. I like to talk my story by myself. It's a huge impact to all of the then participated this time. Then, and also I like to add this talk about my story might be your story, if even under the nuclear radiation accident, because nuclear accident is radiation is spread at many very wide area, not only the nuclear atomic bomb and some nuclear weapons, not only the nuclear weapons but also nuclear power plants. My story might be your story in the future, but if we decided to start right now, we will stop this situation right now from this starting point right now, so then we could stop. Then last night I was just thinking my decision. I will have the power to stop this situation after March 11. So yes, I have a power. You have a power. So it's a very important making a decision. What is a starting point? So and in the Hong Kong, you also have the very severe situation might be happen that, but many people, all of us could make a decision myself, and got the power and more and more. And additionally, I will make another points in the vulnerable people from Rebecca talk. Vulnerable. Every crisis will have the benefit and risk. I don't want to talk about the best and the benefit, risk and the benefit talk, but Fukushima nuclear power plant is located in Fukushima Prefecture. But the local people in Fukushima Prefecture never been provided from the TEPCO nuclear power plant company. TEPCO nuclear power plant is provided only a metropolitan region. Fukushima is a rural area outside of the provided area of TEPCO region. So TEPCO has a huge consuming area in the metropolitan. They need much energy. So then TEPCO built the Fukushima nuclear power plant outside of their provided region, quite far from the Tokyo region and the metropolitan region. Fukushima is just generating and providing sending the electricity to the metropolitan area. Then after nuclear power plant accident, we got the risk, like a fallout of the radiation. So then one of the nuclear issue is risk and benefit is clearly vulnerable people in the rural area will receive only risk. And some people, but this time is metropolitan people will also face on the receive the fallout. Then we have to thinking about the risk and the benefit. But it's a very dangerous discussion point. Risk and benefit. Sometimes national government using very easily to risk and benefit theory. But we have to thinking about when Rebecca pointed on the very important vulnerable people will receive the very severe risk under the nuclear issues, radiation issues. Yes, that's all my one of the environmental we have to consider about the environmental justice and the discrimination, the nuclear discrimination. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
One announcement. We made this booklet in 2015, 10 lessons from Fukushima, reducing risk and protecting communities from nuclear disasters. We made this booklet when the World Conference for Disaster Risk Reduction was of UN was held in Sendai. Sendai is about 1 hour by car from Fukushima. And we have English version and Chinese simplified and Chinese traditional language version, 3 languages. So each participant can take 1 copy in any language you prefer. We will place these booklets in a reception. So please take 1 booklet, only 1. We brought this from Japan and we don't have many copies, so please take 1 copy later.